The wind cut sharply through the pine trees, carrying the scent of snow and damp earth as Clara Hayes bent to lift another piece of firewood. Her fingers were numb despite the worn gloves, her breath forming pale clouds in the cold afternoon air. The cabin sat a short distance behind her, small, weathered, and stubbornly standing against time, much like she was. She had learned long ago not to wait for help. Waiting usually led to disappointment. So she gathered wood alone, as she had every winter since her husband died, one quiet, aching season after another. The forest had become her refuge and her burden. Every fallen branch reminded her of survival, of long nights feeding the stove, of mornings waking to silence so loud it pressed against her chest. Clara was 34, but grief had etched lines into her spirit that no mirror could show. She didn't complain. In the small mountain town of Briar Ridge, people admired her strength from a distance, the way one admires a storm, powerful, but best left untouched. She didn't hear the horse at first. It wasn't until the snow crunched differently behind her that she straightened. A log tucked under her arm and turned slowly. A tall man sat astride a dark brown horse a few yards away, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. He looked out of place among the trees, dressed in a heavy ranch coat that spoke of money and responsibility rather than isolation. His presence startled her, not because she feared him, but because no one ever came this far into the woods unless they had a reason. "I didn't mean to scare you," the man said, dismounting carefully. His voice was calm, deep, carrying a restraint that felt practiced. "I'm Daniel Mercer." The name landed with weight. Everyone in Briar Ridge knew the Mercers. Daniel owned the largest ranch in the valley, a spread of land that employed half the town. He was known as capable, distant, and recently widowed, though no one spoke of that last part unless in hushed tones. Clara nodded once. Clara Hayes. He glanced at the firewood piled beside her, then at the basket she was filling. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're doing this alone." "I always do." She replied simply, as if the answer required no explanation. Daniel hesitated, then reached for a log. "Let me help." She shook her head immediately. "I didn't ask." Something flickered in his eyes, not offense, but recognition. He stepped back, hands lowering slowly. "No," he said, "you didn't." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The wind stirred again, sending snow dusting from the branches above. Daniel cleared his throat. "I came to check the eastern boundary, saw smoke from your chimney, thought I'd make sure everything was all right." "It is," Clara said, "has been for years." She turned back to her task, but after a moment she felt him still standing there. When she looked up again, he was watching her, not the way men sometimes did, with curiosity or pity, but with something deeper, like he was seeing not just what she was doing, but why. "You don't have to do this anymore," he said gently. The words were quiet, almost lost to the wind, but they struck her harder than any storm. Clara froze, the log slipping slightly from her grip. She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "People say that sometimes." "I'm not people," Daniel replied. She studied him then, really studied him. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the tiredness he carried like a second coat, the careful way he spoke, as though every word had been weighed for damage. This was not a man making promises lightly. "And what exactly are you offering?" she asked. "Help," he said simply, "support, work, a place where you don't have to carry everything by yourself." Her chest tightened. She wanted to say no, wanted to protect the fragile balance she had built from loss and routine, but something in his voice, steady, sincere, made her hesitate. "I don't need charity," she said quietly. "Neither do I," he answered. "I need someone strong, and you are." The truth of that statement startled her more than the offer itself. Days passed, then weeks. Daniel didn't push. Instead, he sent supplies, quietly, anonymously at first. Extra firewood appeared stacked neatly beside her cabin, a sack of flour, a new lantern. Clara pretended not to notice, but each small kindness chipped away at the wall she had spent years building. Eventually, she agreed to work at the ranch, not as a favor but for wages. She cooked for the ranch hands, mended fences, tended the garden. The work was hard but familiar. What was unfamiliar was Daniel's presence, steady, respectful, always leaving space where she needed it. They talked sometimes late in the evenings after the ranch had gone quiet. He told her about his wife, Margaret, how illness had taken her slowly, cruelly. Clara shared stories of her husband, Illy, a carpenter with a laugh that once filled her cabin with warmth. Grief, they discovered, spoke the same language in both of them. One night, as snow fell softly outside the ranch house, Clara stood at the window, watching the lights glow across the fields. Daniel joined her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without being touched. "You still gather firewood?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Old habits. You don't have to," he said again, but this time there was no offer attached, just reassurance. Clara turned to him, emotion tightening her throat. "I think part of me needed to believe I could survive alone." Daniel met her gaze. "You did survive, and now," she whispered, "now," he said softly, "you can choose not to be alone." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to lean, just slightly, into someone else's strength. Spring came slowly to Briar Ridge. Snow melted, fields softened, and something inside Clara began to thaw as well. She laughed more, slept better. She still worked hard, still valued her independence, but she no longer felt like she was fighting the world by herself. One afternoon, she returned to the woods, not to gather firewood, but to walk. Daniel rode beside her, leading the horse at her pace. She stopped at the spot where they had first met, where she had been bent beneath the weight of survival. The memory felt distant now, like a life she had lived but no longer inhabited. Clara turned to him and smiled. "You were right." "About what?" he asked. She reached for his hand, steady and warm in hers. "I didn't have to do it any more." Daniel squeezed her fingers gently, as if afraid to break the moment. "Neither do I." The forest stood quiet around them, not lonely but peaceful, and for the first time in a very long while, Clara felt something she thought she had lost forever. Not dependence, not rescue, but partnership. She had carried the firewood long enough. Now she was finally home.